The snow fell so thick and fast that Rosalie Carrington could barely see her own hand in front of her face, much less the trail she had been following just moments before. The blizzard had descended upon Wyoming territory with a vengeance, transforming the April afternoon into a howling white nightmare as she desperately urged her exhausted mare forward through the mounting drifts. It was 1878, and Rosalie, 23 years old and traveling west to join her uncle in Cheyenne, was beginning to understand why the locals had warned her against making this journey alone. The weather in these parts could turn deadly in an instant, especially in the unpredictable spring months when winter refused to loosen its grip on the rugged landscape. "Just a little further, Penny," she urged her horse, the words instantly swallowed by the wind. Her fingers, despite the thick gloves, had gone numb hours ago, and she could no longer feel her toes in her sturdy boots. The cold had a way of seeping through every layer, finding every vulnerability. Rosalie had been raised in Boston, the daughter of a prominent physician who had spared no expense on her education. She was intelligent, capable, and possessed the kind of determination that had earned her father's grudging respect, if not his blessing when she announced her intention to move west. When her uncle's letter had arrived, offering her a position as a teacher in the newly established school in Cheyenne, she had seized the opportunity. Her father's recent passing had left her with enough inheritance to make the journey, but not enough to maintain their Boston home. What she hadn't counted on was how different the West would be from the civilized East she had known her entire life. The stage had deposited her in Laramie 3 days earlier, but the connecting coach to Cheyenne had been delayed by mechanical troubles. Impatient and confident in her abilities, she had purchased Penny from a local stable and set out on her own, certain she could navigate the relatively short distance between the two settlements. Now, as the temperature plummeted and daylight waned, Rosalie realized her terrible mistake. Penny stumbled and Rosalie's heart lurched. The mare was failing. They needed shelter, and soon, through the curtain of snow, Rosalie thought she spotted a darker shadow against the endless white rock formation jutting up from the prairie. With renewed hope, she steered Penny toward it. As they drew closer, her prayers were answered. There, nestled in the rock face, was the black maw of a cave. With the last of her strength, Rosalie urged Penny forward until they were just inside the entrance. The sudden absence of wind was a blessing, though the cold remained. She slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as she took Penny's reins and led her deeper into the cave. "Good girl," she murmured, running a trembling hand over the mare's frost-covered mane. "You saved us both." The cave wasn't deep, perhaps 30 feet from entrance to back wall, but it was enough to shield them from the direct assault of the blizzard. Rosalie fumbled with numb fingers to remove Penny's saddle and saddle bags, knowing the horse would be more comfortable without them. She spread her woolen blanket on the stone floor and sank down, wrapping her arms around her knees. The cold was relentless, seeping up from the ground and radiating from the stone walls. Rosalie knew enough about surviving harsh weather to understand that her situation was dire. Her clothes were damp from the snow, her body temperature dangerously low. She needed fire, but her matches were wet, and there was nothing in the barren cave to burn. As darkness fell outside, the temperature dropped even further. Rosalie huddled close to Penny, trying to absorb some of the animal's body heat, but it wasn't enough. Her thoughts became sluggish, her eyelids heavy. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice warned her that falling asleep would be dangerous, possibly fatal, but she couldn't fight it any longer. Her last conscious thought was of her uncle waiting in Cheyenne, not knowing that his niece was freezing to death in a cave just miles away from safety. The hours passed, and the blizzard showed no signs of abating. Rosalie drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware that fate was about to intervene in the form of a lone rider battling the same storm. Isaac Grayson had been on the trail for 3 days, driving a small herd of cattle from his ranch to Cheyenne when the blizzard hit. A seasoned cowboy who had spent the last 8 years building his modest spread in the Wyoming territory, he knew better than to push on through such dangerous conditions. He'd sent his 2 ranch hands to find shelter with the cattle while he scouted ahead for a suitable location to wait out the storm. At 30, Isaac had the weathered features of a man who lived his life under the open sky. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and his eyes, a striking blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin, could spot trouble at 1,000 yards. He'd learned caution the hard way, surviving Comanche raids, cattle thieves, and the unforgiving elements that had claimed the lives of many less prepared men. His stallion, Thunderbolt, was struggling through the snow when Isaac spotted the same rock formation that had drawn Rosalie hours earlier. With practiced eyes, he identified the cave entrance almost immediately. "There we go, boy," he murmured to his horse, patting the animal's strong neck. "Let's get out of this damned cold." As they approached the cave, Isaac was surprised to see hoofprints, already nearly covered by fresh snow. Someone else had sought refuge here. He drew his revolver, caution being second nature in this territory, before guiding Thunderbolt into the cave's mouth. The darkness inside was nearly complete, but he could make out the shape of another horse standing quietly near the back wall. And there, on the ground beside it, was a smaller form, unmoving. "Hello," Isaac called, his voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. There was no response. He dismounted quickly, securing Thunderbolt before approaching the still figure. Kneeling, he discovered a young woman, her face pale as the snow outside, her lips tinged with blue. For a moment he thought he was too late, but then he detected the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but barely. "Madam, can you hear me?" Isaac touched her shoulder gently, feeling the dampness of her clothing. She didn't respond, her skin ice cold beneath his fingers. Isaac had seen hypothermia before and knew the danger it posed. Moving quickly, he unsaddled Thunderbolt and retrieved his bedroll and the emergency supplies he always carried. He had flint and steel to start a fire, but first, the woman needed to be warmed. "I apologize for the familiarity, madam, but it's necessary," he muttered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He removed her wet outer garments, careful to preserve her modesty as much as the situation allowed. Then he wrapped her in his dry blanket and pulled her close to his chest, sharing his body heat. Isaac had learned survival skills from an old trapper years ago, including how to prevent freezing to death in the harsh Wyoming winters. Body heat was the quickest way to warm someone suffering from extreme cold, though he knew the lady might not appreciate his methods if she regained consciousness. As he held her, he noticed the quality of her clothing and the delicacy of her features. This was no frontier woman used to the hardships of Western life. What was she doing out here alone in such treacherous weather? After nearly an hour, he felt her begin to stir in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing deep brown eyes clouded with confusion. While she tried to speak, her voice a dry whisper. "Easy now," Isaac said, keeping his tone gentle. "You're safe. Got caught in the blizzard, I reckon. Found you nearly frozen solid." Rosalie's mind struggled to make sense of her situation. She was being held by a stranger, a man with intense blue eyes and several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. Her instinct was to pull away, but her body refused to cooperate, and the warmth emanating from him was too precious to reject. "Who?" she managed to croak. "Isaac Grayson," he replied. I ranch about 10 miles south of here, was heading to Cheyenne when the storm hit. He reached for his canteen. Can you drink some water, slowly now? Rosalie nodded weakly, allowing him to help her take a few sips. The water revived her enough to speak more clearly. Rosalie Carrington, she said. I was also traveling to Cheyenne. My uncle is expecting me. Thank you for helping me. Isaac nodded, satisfied that she was coherent enough to explain her situation. Miss Carrington, I need to get a fire going. The blanket and my warmth have helped, but you're still in danger. I'm going to set you down for a moment. He carefully propped her against the cave wall, making sure the blanket remained securely around her, then busied himself gathering what little dry material he could find in the cave. From his saddlebags, he produced a small bundle of kindling and tinder that he always kept wrapped in oilskin for emergencies. Within minutes, he had a small fire crackling between them. It wasn't large, he had limited fuel, but it cast a warm glow throughout the cave and provided much-needed heat. Better? He asked, moving back to her side. Rosalie nodded, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Much. I thought I was going to die here. Nearly did, Isaac said bluntly, though his expression remained kind. What possessed you to travel alone in this season? The spring blizzards in this territory can kill an unprepared traveler faster than any outlaw. Rosalie felt a flush of embarrassment warm her cheeks. The stagecoach broke down in Laramie. I was told Cheyenne was just a day's ride away. It seemed simple enough. Isaac shook his head, a hint of admiration mixing with his disapproval. Brave but foolish, Miss Carrington. Nothing's simple in this country, especially not the weather. I'm beginning to understand that, she admitted, attempting to straighten her posture and wincing at the pain in her stiff limbs. Don't try to move too much yet, Isaac advised. Your body's been through an ordeal. Are you hungry? At the mention of food, Rosalie suddenly realized she was famished. She nodded eagerly. Isaac retrieved jerky and hardtack from his provisions, along with a tin of peaches he'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed as good a time as any to enjoy such a luxury. As they ate in the flickering firelight, Rosalie studied her rescuer more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling whatever challenges came his way. His hands were calloused but gentle as he tended the fire and cared for both horses, ensuring they had water and the little feed he carried. Have you lived in Wyoming territory long, Mr. Grayson? She asked, wanting to break the silence that had fallen between them. 8 years, he replied, settling back down near the fire. Came west after the war between the states, looking for a fresh start. Worked as a hired hand until I saved enough to buy my own place. He glanced at her curiously. And you're clearly not from these parts. Boston, Rosalie said. My father was a physician. He passed away 3 months ago. My uncle, my mother's brother, has lived in Cheyenne for nearly a decade. He offered me a position teaching at the new school. A teacher, Isaac nodded thoughtfully. Cheyenne could use more educated folk. It's growing fast, becoming almost civilized. There was a hint of wry humor in his tone. And that displeases you? Rosalie asked, noticing his expression. Isaac shrugged. Change comes whether we want it or not. Railroads, telegraph lines, new settlers every day. The West I found when I arrived is already disappearing. He poked at the fire with a stick. But I suppose progress has its benefits. Might be nice to have a doctor closer than a 2-day ride when a man breaks his leg. Rosalie smiled at that. I imagine so. She hesitated, then asked, Do you think we'll be able to travel tomorrow? My uncle will be worried if I don't arrive soon. Isaac glanced toward the cave entrance, where the wind still howled and snow continued to fall. Depends on the weather. Blizzard like this usually blows itself out within a day or two. We have enough supplies to wait it out. The reality of their situation settled over Rosalie once more. She was stranded in a cave with a man she had just met, a handsome, capable man who had undoubtedly saved her life, but a stranger nonetheless. In Boston, such a circumstance would have been scandalous beyond repair. Here, it seemed merely a matter of survival. "I apologize for being such a burden, Mr. Grayson," she said softly. Isaac's expression softened. "No apologies needed, Miss Carrington. Anyone would do the same." But Rosalie wasn't so certain that was true. She had heard stories of the dangers that could befall lone travelers in these territories, not just from the elements, but from those who would take advantage of vulnerability. That Isaac had treated her with nothing but respect and concern spoke volumes about his character. As night deepened, the temperature in the cave dropped further despite the small fire. Isaac added the last of his kindling, but Rosalie could see it wouldn't last until morning. "We should conserve our heat," Isaac said matter-of-factly. "I can set up our bedrolls close to each other near the fire. Body heat will help us both survive the night." Rosalie felt a blush creep up her neck at the suggestion, but she knew he was right. This was about survival, not propriety. "Of course," she agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. Isaac efficiently arranged their sleeping area, placing Rosalie's now dry clothes within easy reach should she want to dress more fully during the night. He laid out his bedroll and hers side by side, close enough to share warmth, but with a respectful distance maintained. "Try to get some sleep," he said, lying down beside her. "Your body needs rest to recover." Rosalie nodded, settling into the rough blankets. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she lay listening to the storm outside and the steady breathing of the man beside her. After what seemed like hours, she finally drifted into a fitful slumber. She awoke sometime later to find herself shivering violently, the fire reduced to embers casting barely any heat. Without thinking, she moved closer to Isaac, seeking his warmth. In his sleep, he responded instinctively, wrapping an arm around her and pulling her against his chest. The immediate relief from the cold was worth any impropriety, Rosalie decided as she relaxed into his embrace. She would worry about her reputation when they weren't in danger of freezing to death. Morning arrived with a surprising stillness. The howling wind that had been their constant companion had ceased, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Isaac woke first, momentarily startled to find Rosalie curled against him, her head resting on his chest. He carefully extracted himself without waking her and moved to the cave entrance to assess their situation. The world outside was transformed, covered in a thick blanket of pristine snow that sparkled in the early morning sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a breathtaking landscape and dangerously deep drifts. Travel would still be difficult, but at least it was possible now. When he returned to the fire pit to stoke the remaining embers, Rosalie was sitting up, combing her fingers through her tangled auburn hair in an attempt to bring some order to it. "Good morning," she said, a hint of embarrassment in her voice as she recalled seeking his warmth during the night. "Morning," Isaac replied. "Storm's past. We'll be able to head out after we've had something to eat, though the going will be slow with the snow this deep." Rosalie nodded, relief washing over her. "That's wonderful news. I'm eager to reach Cheyenne." Isaac prepared a simple breakfast from his remaining provisions, sharing equally with Rosalie despite her protests that she was taking too much of his food. "I'll restock in Cheyenne," he assured her. "No sense in either of us traveling hungry." As they ate, Rosalie found herself studying Isaac more openly than she might have considered proper in other circumstances. There was something compelling about him, not just his rugged good looks, but the quiet competence with which he handled every task, the thoughtful way he spoke, choosing his words carefully as if they were valuable commodities not to be wasted. "May I ask you something, Mr. Grayson?" She ventured. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. "Of course. You mentioned coming west after the war. Were you a soldier?" A shadow passed over his face, brief but unmistakable. "Cavalry, fought for the Union, not something I care to dwell on much." Rosalie nodded, understanding his reluctance. Many veterans preferred not to speak of their experiences. "I apologize for prying. My father treated soldiers who returned from the front. I saw how deeply the war affected them." Isaac's expression softened. "No need to apologize. It's a natural question." He paused, then added, "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was," Rosalie said quietly, "though not always an easy one to please. He had high expectations, especially for his only child." "And did you meet those expectations?" Isaac asked. Rosalie smiled ruefully. "In academics, yes. In life choices, less so. He wanted me to marry well and settle into Boston society. I wanted to put my education to use in a more meaningful way. Hence the teaching position in Cheyenne." Isaac nodded, understanding. "Exactly. My uncle wrote that there's a desperate need for qualified teachers as the town grows. Children who might otherwise go without education will have an opportunity to learn." Her eyes lit up as she spoke, passion evident in her voice. "I believe education is the key to improving one's circumstances, don't you?" Isaac considered this as he packed away their breakfast things. "Never had much formal education myself. Learned to read and do figures from my mother, learned about cattle and horses from working with them. But yes, I suppose having more knowledge never hurt anyone." Once they had packed their belongings and saddled the horses, Isaac helped Rosalie mount Penny, noticing how the mare seemed to have recovered well from the previous day's ordeal. "Your horse is sturdy," he commented. "Good stock." "I was fortunate in my purchase, it seems," Rosalie replied, "though I fear I've pushed her too hard. She'll be fine. We'll take it slow today." Isaac swung up onto Thunderbolt's back with the ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. They emerged from the cave into a world of blinding white. The snow reflected the morning sun so intensely that Rosalie had to shield her eyes. Isaac handed her a pair of smoked glasses from his saddlebag. "These help with snow blindness," he explained. "Borrowed the idea from the native peoples, who have been using something similar for generations." Rosalie accepted them gratefully, impressed once again by his preparedness and knowledge. They set off at a measured pace, Isaac leading the way through the deepest drifts, creating a path for Rosalie and Penny to follow. Progress was slow but steady, and as they rode, Rosalie found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Isaac's presence. They talked intermittently throughout the morning about Wyoming territory, about Cheyenne's rapid growth, and eventually about their respective backgrounds. Isaac, she learned, had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. His mother had died when he was 12, his father when he was 16, leaving him to make his own way in the world. He joined the Union Army at 18, served for the duration of the war, then headed west with nothing but his horse and the skills he'd acquired. "Started as a wrangler on a cattle drive from Texas," he told her as they stopped to rest the horses around midday. "Worked my way up to trail boss, saved every penny I could. Finally had enough to buy a small parcel of land and a few head of cattle. Been building my herd ever since." "That's impressive," Rosalie said sincerely. "To create something substantial from nothing requires remarkable determination." Isaac shrugged off the compliment, though she could tell he was pleased by it. "Just doing what needed doing. What about you?" "I imagine Boston society offered more comfortable options than teaching school in a frontier town." Rosalie sighed, thinking of the life she'd left behind. Comfortable, yes. Fulfilling, no. After my mother died when I was 8, my father threw himself into his medical practice. He hired the best governesses and tutors for me, insisted I receive an education equal to any man's. But when it came time to put that education to use, he expected me to set it aside and make an advantageous marriage. And that didn't appeal to you, Isaac guessed. Not in the slightest, Rosalie admitted with a small laugh. I wanted my life to have purpose beyond hosting dinner parties and producing heirs. When my father died, I could have accepted one of several marriage proposals from men who were more interested in my inheritance than my company. Instead, I answered my uncle's letter. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. Takes courage to leave everything familiar behind. Most people cling to what they know, even if it makes them unhappy. I've often wondered if it's courage or simply stubbornness, Rosalie replied, smiling. My father always said I had more than my share of the latter. Sometimes they're one and the same, Isaac said, returning her smile. As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually became less daunting. They descended from the higher elevation where they'd weathered the storm, and the snow became shallower, making travel easier. By late afternoon, Isaac estimated they were only a few hours from Cheyenne. We'll make it before nightfall if we maintain this pace, he told Rosalie, relief evident in his voice. He'd been concerned about her endurance after her close brush with hypothermia, but she had proven remarkably resilient. Rosalie felt a curious mix of emotions at this news. On one hand, she was eager to reach the safety and comfort of her uncle's home, to begin her new life in Cheyenne. On the other, she found herself reluctant to part company with Isaac Grayson. In the short time they'd spent together, she had developed a deep respect for him, and something more an attraction that went beyond his undeniable physical appeal to encompass his character, his quiet strength, and his kindness. Such feelings were impractical, of course. Once they reached Cheyenne, their paths would diverge. He would return to his ranch. She would begin her teaching position. Their brief acquaintance would become nothing more than an anecdote, a story to tell about her journey west. Yet as they rode side by side through the snow-covered landscape, Rosalie couldn't help stealing glances at him, memorizing the way the sun highlighted the angles of his face, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. Isaac, for his part, was experiencing a similar internal conflict. He had spent the last 8 years focused solely on building his ranch, rarely allowing himself to be distracted by personal matters. Women were scarce in the territory, and those who were available typically sought husbands with more financial security than a small rancher could offer. Rosalie Carrington was unlike anyone he had ever met, educated, determined, and possessed of a quiet courage that had earned his admiration. She was also, he acknowledged reluctantly, destined for a life far removed from his own. A Boston-bred lady, accustomed to civilization's comforts, would hardly find happiness in a crude ranch house miles from the nearest town. These thoughts occupied him as they approached Cheyenne, the settlement appearing on the horizon as the afternoon waned. Even from a distance, the signs of rapid growth were evident. The Union Pacific Railroad had transformed what had been little more than a tent city during its construction into a burgeoning town with permanent structures, businesses, and an increasing air of respectability. "There it is," Isaac said, nodding toward the town. "Your new home." Rosalie followed his gaze, taking in the scattered buildings and the smoke rising from numerous chimneys into the clear, cold air. It wasn't Boston, with its brick buildings and cobblestone streets, but it represented the future she had chosen for herself. "It looks promising," she said, unable to keep a hint of uncertainty from her voice. Isaac glanced at her, noting her apprehension. It's growing fast. Got a proper hotel now, several stores, even a theater. Your uncle's letter mentioned a new school, Rosalie nodded. Yes, funded by a combination of town taxes and donations from some of the more prosperous residents. My uncle says there are nearly 30 children enrolled already. Progress, Isaac commented with a smile. Like I said, almost civilized. They rode into town as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the wide main street. Despite the recent storm, there was considerable activity: wagons moving supplies, people hurrying along the wooden sidewalks, the distant whistle of a train arriving at the station. Rosalie gave Isaac directions to her uncle's home based on the information in his letters. It was on the eastern edge of town, a respectable distance from the saloons and other establishments that catered to the rougher elements of frontier society. When they arrived at the modest but well-maintained house, Rosalie felt a surge of emotion, relief at having completed her journey safely, gratitude for Isaac's role in ensuring that outcome, and a surprising reluctance to say goodbye. Before she could dismount, the front door opened, and a tall man with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard rushed out. "Rosalie, thank God!" He hurried down the steps, his expression a mixture of joy and concern. "We've been worried sick. The stage company said you'd left Laramie days ago, and with the blizzard." He trailed off as he reached her horse, helping her down with careful hands. "Uncle Henry," Rosalie said, embracing him warmly, "I'm so sorry to have worried you. I made a foolish decision to travel alone, and if not for Mr. Grayson here, I fear I wouldn't have survived to reach you." Henry Carrington turned to Isaac, extending his hand with genuine gratitude. "Sir, I cannot thank you enough. My niece is all the family I have left in this world." Isaac dismounted, accepting the handshake. "Just fortunate I found her when I did, Mr. Carrington. Your niece showed remarkable fortitude through a difficult situation." "Please, you must come in," Henry insisted. "Martha has supper nearly ready, and you'll want to warm up and rest after your journey." Isaac hesitated, glancing at Rosalie. "That's kind of you, sir, but I should see to my business in town and find lodging for the night. I've imposed on your niece's company enough already." "Nonsense," Henry declared. "We have a spare room, and I won't hear of the man who saved Rosalie's life sleeping in that flea-ridden hotel when we have a comfortable bed and hot meal to offer. Besides, Martha will never forgive me if I let you leave without properly thanking you." Faced with such insistence, and admittedly reluctant to part from Rosalie so abruptly, Isaac acquiesced. "You're very generous, Mr. Carrington. I accept with gratitude." They stabled the horses in the small barn behind the house, where Henry's own horse and buggy were kept, then entered the warm, inviting home. Martha Carrington, Henry's wife of 15 years, greeted them with motherly concern, immediately ushering Rosalie toward the fire and plying her with questions about her health and comfort. "You poor dear, caught in that dreadful storm. You must be exhausted, and half-starved, I'd wager. Sit, sit. Supper is nearly ready." She turned her attention to Isaac, assessing him with kind but shrewd eyes. "And you, Mr. Grayson, are a godsend. To think what might have happened if you hadn't come along." Isaac, uncomfortable with such effusive praise, merely nodded politely. "Anyone would have done the same, madam." "I highly doubt that," Martha replied. "Now, let me show you where you can wash up before supper." The evening passed pleasantly, with a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread restoring their strength after the journey. Rosalie recounted their adventure, careful to emphasize Isaac's calm competence and downplay the more intimate aspects of their survival strategy. Henry and Martha listened with rapt attention, clearly horrified by the dangers their niece had faced, but deeply impressed by Isaac's role in her rescue. As the conversation continued, Henry inquired about Isaac's business in Cheyenne. "Selling a small herd of cattle," Isaac explained. 10 head. Not much, but enough to purchase supplies I'll need for the spring." "And where is your ranch located, Mr. Grayson?" Henry asked. "About 30 miles southwest of here. Small spread, but it's growing. Started with just 20 acres and 5 cattle, up to 200 acres now and nearly 50 head." Henry nodded appreciatively. "That's substantial progress in 8 years. You must be a hard worker with good business sense." "I manage," Isaac said modestly. "Been thinking of diversifying a bit. There's good money in horses if you can breed the right stock." The conversation turned to the developments in Cheyenne with Henry, who worked as the town's surveyor, explaining how rapidly the settlement was expanding. "The railroad has changed everything," he said enthusiastically. "We're getting new residents weekly, businesses opening, services improving. The school where Rosalie will teach was just completed last month, a proper building with glass windows and everything." "When do classes begin?" Isaac asked, glancing at Rosalie. "In 2 weeks," she replied. "Time enough for me to settle in and prepare my lessons. I'll have students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, so organizing appropriate instruction for each age group will be a challenge." "You'll manage splendidly," Martha assured her. "Henry has told me how well educated you are. These children are fortunate to have a teacher of your caliber." As the evening wore on, Isaac found himself increasingly drawn to the family dynamic he was witnessing. There was genuine affection between Henry, Martha, and Rosalie, a warmth that made their modest home feel truly welcoming. It had been many years since he had experienced anything similar, and he felt a pang of longing for what had long been absent from his life. Eventually, Martha showed him to the spare room, a small but comfortable space with a clean bed and a window overlooking the street. Left alone, Isaac stood at the window for a long time, watching as the last lights in town winked out one by one. His thoughts kept returning to Rosalie, her courage, her intelligence, the feel of her in his arms as they shared warmth through the frigid night. These were dangerous thoughts for a man in his position. Rosalie Carrington was an educated Eastern lady embarking on a new life in a growing frontier town. She would likely attract the attention of Cheyenne's more eligible bachelor's merchants, bankers, lawyers who could offer her a life of comfort and respectability. What could a struggling rancher with little formal education and fewer social graces hope to offer such a woman? Yet as he finally lay down to sleep, Isaac couldn't shake the memory of how naturally they had conversed during their journey, how she had looked at him with respect rather than condescension, how her smile had seemed to brighten the bleakest moments of their ordeal. For her part, Rosalie was having similar thoughts as she prepared for bed in the room that would be hers for the foreseeable future. Martha had insisted on heating water for a proper bath, and the luxury of being truly clean after days of travel was indescribable. Dressed in a fresh nightgown, her hair still damp from washing, she sat at the small dressing table, brushing out the tangles. Her reflection showed a face that had already begun to change from her experiences. There was a newfound confidence in her eyes, a sense that she had faced death and survived, thanks in no small part to the man sleeping just down the hall. Isaac Grayson had treated her with respect and consideration throughout their time together, never once making her feel helpless or burdensome despite the circumstances. In Boston, Rosalie had received numerous marriage proposals, each more practical and loveless than the last. The men of her social circle had viewed her primarily as a suitable match, well-bred, well-educated, and possessed of a modest fortune. None had bothered to look beyond these surface qualifications to discover her dreams, her thoughts, her true self. Isaac had done more than look. He had seen her, truly seen her, in the short time they had known each other. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because it offered a glimpse of what a genuine connection might feel like. Terrifying because such feelings for a man she had just met, a man whose life was so different from her own, could only lead to disappointment. With a sigh, Rosalie set down her brush and climbed into bed. Tomorrow, Isaac would conduct his business in town and return to his ranch. She would begin preparing for her teaching position. Their brief intersection would become a memory, nothing more. Yet sleep eluded her as she lay listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the house settling, the soft murmur of Henry and Martha's voices in their room across the hall. Her thoughts kept returning to the cave, to the feeling of safety she had experienced in Isaac's arms despite the perilous situation. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her tumultuous thoughts, and Rosalie drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. Over a breakfast of flapjacks, bacon, and strong coffee, Henry outlined the day's activities. "I'll take you to see the school today, Rosalie, introduce you to the school board members. Then perhaps a tour of the town so you can get your bearings." He turned to Isaac. "And you, Mr. Grayson, what are your plans?" "Need to find the cattle buyer first thing," Isaac replied. "Then stock up on supplies before heading back to the ranch. Will you leave today?" Rosalie asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the small leap of disappointment she felt at the thought. Isaac hesitated before answering. "Depends on how quickly I can conclude my business. Might be wiser to start fresh in the morning, especially with the trails still deep in snow." "Then you must stay another night with us," Martha insisted. "It's the least we can offer after what you've done for Rosalie." Isaac glanced at Rosalie, seeking some indication of her feelings on the matter. She met his eyes briefly before looking down at her plate, but not before he caught the flash of pleasure in her expression. "That's very generous, Mrs. Carrington. Thank you." After breakfast, they went their separate ways, Henry and Rosalie to the school, Martha to visit a friend who had been ill, and Isaac to find the cattle buyer whose name he'd been given by a fellow rancher. The day passed quickly for all of them. Rosalie was impressed with the school building, a simple but sturdy structure with large windows that allowed plenty of natural light. The classroom was equipped with rows of desks, a blackboard, and even a small library of books donated by residents. She met 2 members of the school board, both of whom seemed genuinely pleased with her credentials and eager for her to begin teaching. Henry then showed her around Cheyenne, pointing out the essential establishments, the general store, the bank, the post office, as well as the areas he advised her to avoid, primarily the saloons and brothels clustered at the western end of town. "Not that you would seek out such places," he assured her hastily, "but it's best to be informed. Cheyenne is growing more civilized by the day, but it still has its rough elements." Rosalie nodded, taking in the bustling activity around them. The town was a curious mixture of frontier rawness and emerging civilization. Women in fashionable dresses walked the same streets as cowboys in trail-worn chaps, while freight wagons shared the thoroughfare with elegant buggies. As they passed the general store, Rosalie spotted a familiar figure inside Isaac, examining a coil of rope with critical attention. Without thinking, she paused, drawing Henry's notice. "Ah, there's your rescuer," Henry observed with a knowing smile. "Shall we say hello?" Rosalie hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "I wouldn't want to interrupt his business." "Nonsense," Henry said, already steering her toward the store entrance. A brief greeting is hardly an imposition. They entered the store, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. Isaac looked up, his serious expression immediately warming when he saw Rosalie. "Miss Carrington, Mr. Carrington," he greeted them, setting down the rope. "How goes your tour of Cheyenne?" "Very well," Rosalie replied. "The school is impressive, and Uncle Henry has been an excellent guide to the town's geography." "Found everything you need for your ranch?" Henry inquired. Isaac nodded. "Just about. Prices are higher than I'd like, but that's to be expected with winter transportation challenges." They chatted briefly about his cattle sale, which had concluded successfully, before Henry excused himself to speak with the storekeeper about an order he'd placed the previous week. Left momentarily alone with Isaac, Rosalie felt an unexpected shyness. "I wanted to thank you again," she said quietly, "for everything. I realize I haven't properly expressed my gratitude." Isaac shook his head dismissively. "No thanks necessary, Miss Carrington. I'm just glad we both made it through the blizzard safely." "Nevertheless, I owe you my life," Rosalie insisted. "That's not a debt easily repaid." "If you're determined to consider it a debt," Isaac said with a slight smile, "then perhaps you could repay it by allowing me to call on you sometime. That is, if you'd be amenable to a visit once you're settled." The request surprised Rosalie, though not unpleasantly. "I would like that very much, Mr. Grayson." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed during their shared ordeal, a recognition that neither was quite ready for it to end. The moment was broken when Henry returned, and soon after, they parted ways with promises to meet again at supper. As Rosalie and her uncle continued their tour, she found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Isaac and his unexpected invitation to call on her. "He seems a good man, your Mr. Grayson," Henry commented as they walked home. "He's not my Mr. Grayson," Rosalie protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Henry chuckled. "Perhaps not yet, but I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him when you think no one is watching." "Uncle Henry, we barely know each other." "Sometimes that matters less than what you do know," Henry said thoughtfully. "Your Aunt Martha and I had known each other just 3 weeks when I proposed. When it's right, it's right." "You're getting far ahead of things," Rosalie insisted. "Mr. Grayson merely asked if he might call on me sometime. That's hardly a declaration of intent." "Of course," Henry agreed, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. "Just an observation from a man who's seen his share of beginnings." Rosalie chose not to pursue the conversation further, but her uncle's words lingered in her mind as they returned home. Could Henry be right? Was there something more substantial developing between her and Isaac than mere gratitude and circumstantial intimacy? The evening brought them together again around the Carringtons' dining table, where Martha had prepared another excellent meal. The conversation flowed easily, covering topics from local politics to literature. Rosalie was pleasantly surprised to discover that Isaac enjoyed reading, particularly histories and accounts of exploration, though he apologized for what he called his uneducated opinions on the material. After supper, Henry produced a chess set, challenging Isaac to a game while Martha and Rosalie worked on mending near the fire. The domestic scene felt surprisingly natural, as if Isaac had always been a part of their small family circle rather than a chance acquaintance of just 2 days. As Rosalie stitched a torn hem on one of her traveling dresses, she found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Isaac, studying his profile as he concentrated on the chessboard. There was an intensity to his focus that she found compelling the same deliberate attention he had given to ensuring their survival during the blizzard, now directed toward the strategic placement of carved wooden pieces. When the chess game concluded with Henry's victory, "A close match," Henry declared generously, though Rosalie suspected her uncle had been the superior player throughout. Martha served tea and her special apple cake before announcing that it was time for her to retire. "Don't stay up too late," she admonished them. "Especially you, Rosalie. You need your rest after your ordeal." Henry soon followed his wife upstairs, leaving Rosalie and Isaac alone in the comfortable sitting room. A brief, awkward silence fell between them, broken when Rosalie gathered her courage to speak. "Will you return directly to your ranch tomorrow?" she asked. Isaac nodded. "Need to check on my hands and the rest of the herd. Winter's always hard on the cattle, and this late blizzard won't have helped matters." "Of course." Rosalie hesitated, then continued. "I meant what I said earlier. I would be pleased if you called on me again when your work allows." Isaac studied her for a moment, his blue eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Miss Carrington, Rosalie, I want to be clear about something. I'm not a wealthy man, nor am I particularly refined. My ranch is small, the house even smaller. I work from sunrise to sunset most days just to keep everything going." "Why are you telling me this?" Rosalie asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because I don't want there to be any misunderstandings between us. Your uncle is right, Cheyenne is growing, becoming more civilized. You'll meet men here who can offer you a life similar to what you knew in Boston. Merchants, lawyers, bankers with proper houses and regular incomes." Rosalie felt a flicker of irritation at his assumptions. "Mr. Grayson, do you imagine I left Boston and traveled all this way only to recreate the very life I was escaping? I chose to come west because I wanted something different, something real." Isaac appeared taken aback by her vehemence. "I didn't mean to offend. I just wanted to be honest about my situation." "And I appreciate your honesty," Rosalie said, softening her tone. "But perhaps you could allow me to decide for myself what sort of life and what sort of people appeal to me." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face. "That seems reasonable." They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging widely but always returning to their respective plans and hopes for the future. Isaac spoke of his ambitions for his ranch, the improvements he wanted to make, the expansion he envisioned if the next few years were profitable. Rosalie shared her ideas for the school, her desire to provide not just basic literacy and numeracy, but a true education that would open doors for her students. When they finally bid each other good night, there was a new understanding between them, a mutual recognition that whatever had begun in that snow-filled cave might be worth exploring further. Morning arrived all too quickly. After breakfast, Isaac prepared to depart, loading his supplies onto Thunderbolt and saying his goodbyes to Henry and Martha with genuine warmth. "You're welcome in our home anytime, Mr. Grayson," Martha told him, pressing a package of leftover apple cake into his hands. "Don't be a stranger." "I won't, madam. Thank you for your hospitality." Henry shook his hand firmly. "Safe journey. And remember what I said about that northern pasture land. If you're looking to expand, it could be a good investment." Finally, Isaac turned to Rosalie, who stood slightly apart, her emotions carefully controlled. "Miss Carrington, it has been a privilege making your acquaintance, despite the circumstances." "The privilege was mine, Mr. Grayson," she replied formally, aware of her aunt and uncle's watchful presence. "I owe you my life." Isaac hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I want you to have this," he said, placing it in her palm. "It's brought me luck over the years." Rosalie looked down at a small carved wooden horse, worn smooth with handling. "I couldn't possibly." "Please," Isaac insisted. "Consider it a welcome gift to your new home, and a reminder that not all your experiences in the West have been harrowing. Rosalie closed her fingers around the carving, deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." With a final nod to the family, Isaac mounted Thunderbolt and set off, glancing back once to raise his hat in farewell before riding out of sight. The days that followed were filled with activity as Rosalie prepared for her teaching position. She organized lesson plans, familiarized herself with the textbooks available, and met more of Cheyenne's residents, including several parents of her future students. Everyone she encountered was welcoming, impressed by her credentials and eager to have a qualified teacher for their children. Yet despite the busyness and the warm reception, Rosalie found her thoughts frequently returning to Isaac. She kept his carved horse on her bedside table, often finding herself running her fingers over its smooth contours as she pondered their brief but intense time together. 2 weeks passed, and classes began at the new school. Rosalie discovered that teaching 28 students of varying ages and abilities was even more challenging than she had anticipated, but also more rewarding. Many of the children had never had formal education before, and their eagerness to learn was inspiring. Among her older students was a 15-year-old girl named Emma Jenkins, whose quick mind and voracious appetite for knowledge reminded Rosalie of herself at that age. Emma stayed after class one day to ask about a passage in their history text. "Miss Carrington, is it true that women back east are fighting for the right to vote?" she asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Yes, indeed," Rosalie replied. "The suffrage movement has been gaining momentum for years. Many women and some men believe that women should have an equal voice in government." "And what do you believe?" Emma pressed. Rosalie considered her response carefully. "I believe that intelligence and capability are not determined by gender, and that society benefits when all its members can contribute fully." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "My pa says women out here in the territories have more freedom than Eastern ladies because we have to be partners with our men to survive." "Is that true?" "There's some truth to that," Rosalie acknowledged. "Frontier life demands cooperation and shared responsibility. But there's still progress to be made everywhere in how women are viewed and what opportunities are available to us." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma's father, who had come to walk her home. As they left, Rosalie reflected on the girl's questions. Wyoming territory was indeed progressive in some ways. Women here had more legal rights than in many eastern states, including the right to own property independently, and, in some areas, even the right to vote in local elections. Perhaps that was part of what had drawn her west, the sense that here, in this still-forming society, there was room to define oneself beyond the rigid expectations of established communities. As April turned to May and the last traces of snow melted away, revealing the first green shoots of spring, Rosalie settled into a routine. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, evenings to preparing lessons and reading, Sundays to church and social calls with Martha and Henry. She met many of Cheyenne's prominent citizens, and, as Isaac had predicted, attracted the attention of several eligible bachelors. Edward Simmons, the banker's son, was particularly persistent, calling on her regularly with flowers and invitations to various town events. He was pleasant enough, well-educated, polite, financially secure, and under other circumstances, Rosalie might have been interested. But every time she considered accepting his invitations, her thoughts would drift to a pair of intense blue eyes and a quiet voice that had guided her through the darkest night of her life. It was nearly a month after her arrival in Cheyenne when Isaac Grayson returned. Rosalie was just dismissing her class for the day when she glanced out the schoolhouse window and spotted a familiar figure tying his horse to the hitching post outside. Her heart leapt at the sight, and she had to remind herself to maintain her composure as she bid her students goodbye. Many of the younger children rushed past Isaac on their way out, giving him curious glances. He tipped his hat to them, smiling slightly as they giggled and whispered among themselves. When the last student had departed, Isaac entered the schoolhouse, removing his hat as he stepped through the door. He looked good, his skin tanned from working outdoors, his posture straight and confident. He'd trimmed his beard and was wearing a clean shirt under his usual work jacket. "Miss Carrington," he greeted her, his voice as she remembered it low and steady. "Mr. Grayson," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. What a pleasant surprise! He glanced around the classroom with interest, taking in the rows of desks, the blackboard covered with Rosalie's neat handwriting, the maps and charts hanging on the walls. "Looks like you've made this place your own." "I've tried," Rosalie said. "The children are wonderful, eager to learn for the most part. A few troublemakers, of course, but that's to be expected." Isaac nodded, then seemed to gather his resolve. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you home, unless you have other arrangements." "I would like that very much," Rosalie said, her cheeks warming at his formal request. "Just let me gather my things." As they walked through town toward the Carrington home, Rosalie was acutely aware of the glances they received. Cheyenne was still small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sight of the new schoolteacher walking with the rancher who had reportedly saved her life would certainly fuel gossip. "How is your ranch?" she asked, genuinely interested in his life during their separation. "Surviving," Isaac replied with a wry smile. "Lost a few head to the blizzard, but fewer than I feared. The new calves are healthy, which is the main thing, and I've hired another hand young fellow named Jim who has a good way with horses." "That sounds like progress. Slow progress, but yes." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what your uncle said regarding that northern pasture land. Went to look at it last week. It's good grazing with a year-round spring. Might be worth the investment if I can arrange the financing." They talked easily as they walked, catching up on each other's lives over the past month. Isaac asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experiences, and Rosalie found herself sharing both the challenges and rewards of her new profession. In turn, she inquired about the details of ranch life, genuinely curious about his day-to-day existence. When they reached the Carrington home, Rosalie was reluctant for their time together to end. "Would you like to come in? Aunt Martha always prepares more food than necessary. I'm sure there's plenty for one more at supper." "Thank you, but I have some business to conclude in town before heading back," Isaac declined, though he seemed equally reluctant to part. "But I was hoping. That is, I wanted to ask if you might consider joining me for a picnic on Sunday afternoon. The weather's fine now, and there's a pleasant spot by the creek just outside of town." Rosalie's heart quickened at the invitation, a proper outing, just the two of them. "I would enjoy that very much, Mr. Grayson." "Isaac," he said quietly, "I think we've shared enough to use first names, don't you?" "Isaac," she repeated, liking the way it felt to say his name aloud, "and you must call me Rosalie." "Rosalie," he nodded, a smile warming his eyes. "Sunday, then. I could call for you after church." "I'll look forward to it." With that arrangement made, they parted, but Rosalie carried the warm glow of anticipation with her through the evening. When she told Martha and Henry about the invitation at supper, they exchanged knowing glances, but made no comment beyond expressing pleasure that Isaac had returned to town. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures mild enough for comfort without the scorching heat that would come with full summer. Rosalie chose her attire carefully, a simple but becoming day dress in a soft blue that complemented her auburn hair, which she wore partly up, partly flowing down her back in the more relaxed style that had become acceptable in the West. After church, where she had to endure the curious glances and whispered comments of the congregation when Isaac joined them in the Carringtons' pew, they set off for their picnic. Isaac had borrowed Henry's buggy for the occasion, and they drove at a leisurely pace out of town, following the creek to a spot where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. "It's beautiful here," Rosalie said as Isaac helped her down from the buggy. The creek gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones, meadowlarks sang in the nearby prairie grasses, and wildflowers dotted the ground with splashes of yellow and purple. "One of my favorite places," Isaac admitted, spreading a blanket beneath the largest cottonwood. From a basket, he produced a surprising array of foods: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of lemonade. "Martha helped with the provisions," he explained, noting Rosalie's impressed expression. "I'm afraid my own cooking skills are limited to what can be prepared over a campfire." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing as naturally as it had during their journey from the cave. Rosalie found herself laughing often at Isaac's dry observations and the stories he told of ranch life. In turn, she shared anecdotes about her students and her adjustment to Western ways. "I embarrassed myself terribly last week," she confessed. "Mrs. Daniels, one of the school board members' wives, invited several ladies to tea, and I arrived wearing my best Boston attire, complete with corset pulled so tight I could barely breathe. Every other woman there was dressed practically, and they looked at me as if I'd arrived wearing a ball gown to a barn raising." Isaac chuckled. "I imagine you'll adapt quickly. You struck me as a practical woman from the start." "Did I?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "Even when you found me half frozen in a cave, having made the supremely impractical decision to travel alone during blizzard season." "Even then," Isaac confirmed with a warm smile, "you were focused on survival, not hysterics." Many women and men, for that matter, would have fallen apart in those circumstances. The afternoon passed too quickly. They walked along the creek, gathering wildflowers and watching a family of beavers at work on their dam. Isaac pointed out various plants and animals, sharing the knowledge he'd acquired during his years in the territory. Rosalie listened attentively, impressed by his deep understanding of the natural world around them. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and prepared to return to town. Before they left, Isaac turned to Rosalie with an unusually serious expression. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Something about me that you should know." Rosalie's stomach tightened with sudden apprehension. "What is it?" Isaac took a deep breath. "During the war, I was captured at the Battle of Fredericksburg, spent 6 months in a Confederate prison camp before I was exchanged. It changed me. Sometimes I still have nightmares. Sometimes certain sounds, a door slamming, unexpected thunder, can take me back there for a moment." Rosalie remained silent, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. "I don't talk about it much. Most people out here don't know. But I wanted to be honest with you because—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Because I care for you, Rosalie. More than I expected to. More than might be wise given our different backgrounds." Moved by his vulnerability and his admission, Rosalie stepped closer to him. "Isaac, we all carry our past with us. What matters is who we choose to be now and who we strive to become." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "And as for our different backgrounds, perhaps they're not as important as what we share." Isaac covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers. "And what do we share in your view?" "Determination," Rosalie said without hesitation. "A willingness to work hard for what we want, a belief that we can shape our own futures." She smiled softly. "And perhaps a certain stubbornness that my father always claimed would either be my downfall or my greatest strength." The tension in Isaac's face eased, replaced by a warmth that made Rosalie's heart flutter. "Stubbornness can be an asset in this country," he agreed. "Keeps a person going when sense might tell them to give up." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding, until the lengthening shadows reminded them of the need to return to town. The drive back was quieter, a comfortable silence between them as they each processed the significant step their relationship had taken that afternoon. When Isaac left her at the Carringtons' door with a promise to call again the following weekend, Rosalie felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. The feeling only intensified when, just before departing, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply meaningful. Over the weeks that followed, their courtship progressed with a steady, unhurried pace that suited them both. Isaac would come to town every weekend, sometimes staying overnight at the hotel rather than at the Carringtons to avoid any appearance of impropriety. They attended church together, went on picnics, rode out to see various local landmarks, and once even attended a dance at the new town hall, where Isaac surprised Rosalie with his competence at traditional reels and waltzes. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he guided her smoothly around the floor. "My mother insisted," he replied with a smile. "Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly escort a lady. She gave lessons to all the local boys in our Pennsylvania town." These glimpses into his past delighted Rosalie, helping her build a more complete picture of the man behind the reserved exterior. In turn, she shared stories of her own childhood, her father's demanding expectations, her mother's gentler influence before her untimely death, her determination to make something of the education she had fought so hard to obtain. As spring gave way to summer, their feelings for each other deepened. Rosalie found herself counting the days between Isaac's visits, treasuring every letter he sent, simple, straightforward accounts of his daily life that nevertheless revealed his growing attachment to her. For his part, Isaac began to speak more openly of his hopes for the future, including Rosalie in his plans in ways that made his intentions increasingly clear. Edward Simmons and the other would-be suitors gradually accepted that the schoolteacher's affections were engaged elsewhere, though town gossip continued to speculate on the unlikely pairing of the Boston-bred teacher and the rough-hewn rancher. "They're saying I'm after your land," Rosalie told Isaac with wry amusement during one of their walks. "Apparently, I've set my cap for you because I'm a scheming Eastern woman with designs on your vast ranching empire." Isaac laughed outright at that. "If only they knew the state of my vast empire, I'd welcome someone with schemes to improve it." July brought scorching heat and the end of the school term. With no classes to teach until September, Rosalie found herself at something of a loose end, though she filled her days with reading, helping Martha with various charitable activities, and writing long letters to her few remaining friends in Boston. It was during this summer break that Isaac made an unexpected proposal. "I'd like you to see the ranch," he said one evening as they sat on the Carringtons' front porch, seeking relief from the stuffy interior of the house. "Not just a quick visit, but a proper stay. A week, perhaps. You could get a real sense of what life is like there." Rosalie was immediately intrigued by the idea, but also aware of the potential for gossip. "I'd love to, but..." "I've already spoken with your uncle," Isaac assured her. "He and Martha would accompany you, of course. I've invited them to stay as well. Everything completely proper." Touched by his consideration for her reputation, and excited by the prospect of seeing where and how he lived, Rosalie eagerly agreed to the plan. Arrangements were made for the following week, when Henry could take time away from his surveying duties. The journey to Isaac's ranch took most of a day, with Henry driving the buggy carrying Martha and Rosalie, while Isaac rode alongside on Thunderbolt. As they traveled south and west from Cheyenne, the landscape changed subtly, the flat prairie giving way to more varied terrain with rolling hills and occasional stands of pine and spruce. When they finally crested a rise and Isaac pointed ahead, saying, "There it is," Rosalie felt a surge of emotion at her first sight of his home. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, with a creek running through it and pastures extending up the gentle slopes on either side. The house itself was modest but sturdy-looking, built of logs with a stone chimney. Nearby stood a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and closer to the house, several horses watched their approach with alert interest. "It's lovely," Rosalie said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. While not grand by any means, there was something deeply appealing about the self-contained world Isaac had created here. As they drew closer, two men emerged from the barn, Isaac's ranch hands, Jim and Pete, whom he had mentioned in his letters. They greeted the visitors respectfully before taking charge of the horses and buggy, while Isaac escorted his guests into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and two smaller bedrooms leading off it. Isaac had clearly gone to considerable effort to prepare for their visit. The house was spotlessly clean, with fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table and new curtains at the windows that Rosalie suspected had not been there previously. "It's not much," Isaac said, watching her reaction carefully. "But it's home. It's wonderful," Rosalie assured him, meaning it. There was an honest simplicity to the place that appealed to her far more than the ornate, cluttered interiors that had been fashionable in Boston. The sleeping arrangements had been carefully planned. Martha and Henry would take one bedroom, Rosalie the other, while Isaac would bunk with his hands in the separate cabin where they normally lived. Everything was, as promised, entirely proper. The week that followed gave Rosalie a thorough introduction to ranch life. Isaac showed her every aspect of his operation, from the spring that provided their water to the new pasture land he had recently acquired with a loan from the bank. She met all the animals, learned about the different breeds of cattle, and even tried her hand at various chores, much to Isaac's amusement and Martha's mild disapproval. "You don't need to prove you can do everything, my dear," Martha told her after finding Rosalie helping Jim mend a fence. "No one expects a lady to engage in physical labor." But Rosalie was determined to understand the full reality of the life Isaac led, not just the sanitized version he might present to a visitor. And to her surprise, she found much of the work satisfying in a way her Boston life had never been. There was a direct connection between effort and result, a tangible quality to each accomplishment that appealed to her practical nature. The evenings were perhaps the most enjoyable part of each day. After supper, they would gather on the small porch to watch the sunset, talking quietly as darkness fell and the stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky. Sometimes, Isaac would tell stories of his early days in the territory, or Henry would reminisce about his own journey west 15 years earlier. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the soft lowing of cattle, the occasional nicker of a horse, the distant yip of coyotes. On their last evening, Henry and Martha retired early, leaving Isaac and Rosalie alone on the porch. They sat side by side on the rough-hewn bench, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence keenly. "I've enjoyed having you here," Isaac said after a long, comfortable silence. "The place feels different with you in it. Better." Rosalie turned to look at him, barely able to make out his features in the gathering darkness. "I've enjoyed being here, more than I expected to, honestly." "Could you see yourself?" Isaac began, then hesitated. "That is, would this life be too difficult, do you think? Too isolated? Too lacking in the comforts and society you're used to?" Understanding the question behind the question, Rosalie chose her words carefully. "There would be adjustments, certainly, but nothing insurmountable. The isolation doesn't trouble me. I've never needed constant social engagement to be content. As for comforts," she gestured around them at the peaceful ranch sleeping under the starry sky. "There are different kinds of comfort, Isaac. This place has them in abundance." Isaac reached for her hand then, his fingers warm as they entwined with hers. "I don't want to rush you, Rosalie. We haven't known each other long, by most standards, but I find myself thinking of the future of my future, and I can't imagine it without you in it." Rosalie's heart swelled with emotion. "Nor can I imagine my future without you." They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, sharing the unspoken understanding that their lives had become irrevocably intertwined since that fateful blizzard. No formal proposal was made that night, but they both knew it was only a matter of time. The following morning, as they prepared to depart for Cheyenne, Isaac took Rosalie aside for a private moment. "I'll come to town next weekend," he promised. "There's something important I want to discuss with you and your uncle." Rosalie nodded, understanding his meaning perfectly. "I'll look forward to it." The ride back to town seemed shorter somehow, filled as it was with anticipation of what lay ahead. When they arrived at the Carrington home, Isaac helped Rosalie down from the buggy, holding her hands a moment longer than necessary. "Until Saturday," he said quietly. "Until Saturday," she echoed, reluctant to let him go but knowing they would soon have all the time in the world together. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Rosalie tried to focus on preparing for the upcoming school term, but her thoughts kept drifting to Isaac and the life they might build together. Would they expand the ranch house? Would she continue teaching, perhaps instructing the children of nearby ranchers? How often would they be able to visit Cheyenne, to maintain connections with the Carringtons and the friends she had made in town? These pleasant speculations occupied her mind as she went about her daily tasks, counting down the days until Isaac's return. Saturday finally arrived, and with it, a surprise, a letter delivered by a rider from Isaac's ranch. Rosalie's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, uncertain what message might be so urgent that it couldn't wait until his arrival later that day. "My dearest Rosalie, I regret that I must delay my visit to town. One of our cows wandered off with her new calf, and Pete spotted signs that wolves might be in the area. Jim and I will be searching for them today, and I cannot in good conscience leave the task to my hands alone. Please convey my apologies to Henry and Martha. I will come to Cheyenne as soon as this matter is resolved, hopefully no later than Wednesday next. Know that my thoughts are with you, as they have been every moment since we parted." With deepest affection, Isaac's disappointment washed over Rosalie, though she understood the necessity of Isaac's decision. Ranch life was dictated by immediate needs and emergencies, not by convenient schedules. It was a reality she would need to accept if she were to share her life with him. She showed the letter to Henry and Martha, who expressed sympathy for her disappointment, but agreed that Isaac had made the responsible choice. The mark of a good rancher is putting the welfare of his animals first, Henry observed. You wouldn't want a man who abandoned his responsibilities, even for the pleasure of your company. I know, Rosalie sighed. It's just that I was so looking forward to seeing him. Martha patted her hand sympathetically. Wednesday will be here before you know it, dear. But Wednesday came and went with no sign of Isaac and no further message. By Friday, Rosalie was genuinely concerned. It wasn't like him to break his word without explanation. Perhaps I should ride out there, Henry suggested at breakfast, seeing his niece's worried expression. Make sure everything's all right. Before Rosalie could respond, there was a knock at the door. Martha went to answer it and returned a moment later with Jim, Isaac's young ranch hand. The normally cheerful young man looked exhausted and troubled. Miss Carrington, he said, removing his hat as he entered the kitchen. Mr. Carrington, Mrs. Carrington, I've come with news of Mr. Grayson. Rosalie's heart seemed to stop. What's happened? Is he hurt? Jim nodded grimly. Injured pretty bad, madam. We found the cow and calf, but there were wolves, just like we feared. One of them went for the calf, and Mr. Grayson got between them. The wolf bit his leg something fierce before he could shoot it. My God, Henry muttered. How bad is it? Bad enough, Jim replied. Pete rode for the doctor in Buffalo Springs, but he says the wound's infected. Mr. Grayson's got a high fever, been in and out of consciousness since yesterday. He looked directly at Rosalie. He's been asking for you, miss. That's why I came. Thought you should know. Rosalie was already on her feet. I'm coming with you. Now. Uncle Henry, can you hitch the buggy while I pack some things? No one questioned her decision. Within the hour, they were on the road to Isaac's ranch. Rosalie, Henry, and Martha, with Jim riding ahead to inform the doctor of their approach. The journey seemed interminable, each mile stretching endlessly as Rosalie imagined Isaac suffering, possibly dying, while she was still hours away. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting. Pete met them at the door, his expression grave. Doctor's with him now, he reported. Fever's still high, but he's been more alert the last hour or so. Rosalie barely heard Martha's questions about accommodation or Henry's inquiries about the doctor's assessment. Her focus was entirely on reaching Isaac. Pete led her to the bedroom, where a gray-haired man in shirt sleeves was bent over the bed. Dr. Morgan, Pete said quietly. This here's Miss Carrington. The doctor straightened, his weary face softening at the sight of her. Ah, the lady he's been calling for. Come in, my dear. Perhaps your presence will accomplish what my medicines cannot. He stepped aside, revealing Isaac lying pale and still on the bed, his normally tanned face flushed with fever, his strong body looking somehow diminished by illness. His injured leg was elevated on pillows, thick bandages visible beneath the light sheet covering him. Rosalie moved to the bedside, taking Isaac's hand in hers. His skin was hot and dry, his breathing rapid and shallow. Isaac, she said softly, I'm here, it's Rosalie. For a moment there was no response, then his eyelids fluttered and he turned his head slightly toward her voice. Rosalie. He murmured, his voice barely audible. You came. Of course I came, she said, fighting back tears. As soon as I heard. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before his eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming him. But his fingers tightened slightly around hers, and Rosalie felt a surge of determination. She would not lose him, not now, not like this, not when they had only just found each other. She looked up at the doctor. Tell me what to do. How can I help? Dr. Morgan regarded her with approval. Keep him cool. Make sure he drinks whenever he's conscious and watch for any worsening of his symptoms. I've cleaned the wound and drained the infection as best I can. The rest depends on his strength and, perhaps, his will to recover. He gathered his instruments, placing them in his bag. I'll stay the night, check on him again in the morning." The night that followed was the longest of Rosalie's life. She sat beside Isaac's bed, bathing his face and neck with cool water when the fever raged, helping him sip broth or water during his brief periods of lucidity, and simply holding his hand through the worst of his delirious episodes. Martha relieved her for short periods, insisting she eat something or rest briefly, but Rosalie refused to leave Isaac's side for long. Toward dawn, the fever finally broke. Isaac fell into a natural, healing sleep, his breathing deeper and more regular, his skin cooling to a normal temperature. Dr. Morgan, who had checked on him periodically throughout the night, nodded with satisfaction. "The worst is past," he announced. "Barring any new complications, he should recover now. Slowly, mind you, that leg will take time to heal properly. But he's a strong man, and it seems he has good reason to fight his way back to health." Relief washed over Rosalie in a wave so powerful she nearly collapsed. Only then, with the immediate crisis past, did she allow Martha to lead her to the small sitting room where a makeshift bed had been prepared. She fell into an exhausted sleep, still wearing the same clothes she had traveled in the day before. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky. She had slept for hours. Panicked, she rushed to Isaac's room only to find him awake, propped up slightly on pillows and notably improved. His eyes, though still shadowed with pain, brightened when he saw her. "There you are," he said, his voice weak but clear. "They told me you stayed up all night with me, but I wasn't sure if I'd dreamed it." Rosalie moved to his side, taking his hand. "Not a dream. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Isaac admitted, "but better than yesterday, I'm told." "You gave us quite a scare," Rosalie said, unable to keep a slight tremor from her voice. Isaac's expression turned serious. "I'm sorry for that, and sorry I missed our appointment in town. I had plans for that day." "Plans that can wait until you're well," Rosalie assured him. He shook his head stubbornly. "No, I've waited long enough." With visible effort, he reached under his pillow and withdrew a small object, a ring, simple but elegant, with a modest diamond that caught the light as he held it out to her. "Rosalie Carrington, will you marry me?" It's not the romantic proposal I'd planned, and I know I must look a sorry sight right now, but I can't bear another day without knowing if you'll be my wife. Tears filled Rosalie's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man holding it, this brave, honorable man who had saved her life in a blizzard and now offered her his heart despite his own suffering. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Isaac Grayson, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I was going to ask your uncle's blessing first," he confessed. "Do it properly." Rosalie laughed softly. "I think Uncle Henry has been expecting this since the day you brought me to his doorstep. But we can speak with him together if you like." As it happened, Henry was not at all surprised when they shared their news later that day. He gave his blessing readily, expressing only one condition, that they wait until Isaac was fully recovered before holding the wedding. "No sense starting a marriage with one of you an invalid," he said pragmatically. "Besides, Rosalie has the school term beginning soon. Better to wait until Christmas break, when she can take some time away without disrupting her students' education." Isaac agreed, though somewhat reluctantly. "4 months seems a long time to wait," he told Rosalie when they were alone again, "but your uncle makes good sense as usual." "It will give us time to prepare properly," Rosalie pointed out, "and for you to heal completely." The next few weeks established a new pattern for them. Rosalie returned to Cheyenne to begin the fall school term, but she rode out to the ranch every weekend, sometimes with Henry or Martha, sometimes with Jim as an escort. Isaac's recovery progressed steadily, though more slowly than he would have liked. By the end of August, he was moving about with the aid of a cane. By mid-September, he was able to ride short distances, allowing him to begin resuming some of his ranch duties. October brought the first hint of winter to the air, reminding them of their initial meeting during the April blizzard. On one of Rosalie's weekend visits, Isaac suggested they ride to the cave where he had found her. "Are you sure you're strong enough for such a journey?" she asked, concerned. "Strong enough," he assured her. "The leg's nearly healed, and I need to start rebuilding my strength if I'm to be a proper husband by Christmas." They set out early on a crisp Saturday morning, riding at an easy pace through countryside transformed by autumn colors. The journey took several hours, but Isaac had packed a substantial lunch, and they stopped frequently to rest both themselves and the horses. When they finally reached the rock formation that housed the cave, Rosalie felt a strange mix of emotions: remembered fear from her ordeal, profound gratitude for Isaac's timely arrival, and a sense of coming full circle as they now approached the place together, not as strangers but as betrothed. They dismounted, securing the horses before walking to the cave entrance. Inside, it was much as Rosalie remembered: cool, dim, with smooth stone walls and floor. But seeing it now, in safety and with Isaac beside her, she could appreciate its simple beauty in a way that had been impossible during her desperate struggle for survival. "It looks smaller than I remembered," she commented. Isaac nodded. "Fear has a way of magnifying things." He took her hand, leading her further inside. "You were here, just about, already half frozen when I found you." Rosalie squeezed his fingers. "I've often wondered what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. If you'd taken a different route or decided to weather the storm elsewhere." "I try not to think about that," Isaac said quietly. "The idea of you alone here in the cold." He shook his head, banishing the image. "Perhaps it wasn't just chance that brought me this way. My mother always believed that God had a plan for each of us, that nothing happened without purpose." "And do you believe that?" Rosalie asked. Isaac considered the question seriously. "I don't know about a grand plan for everything. Seen too much senseless suffering to believe that. But I do think some things, some meetings, some moments are meant to be." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I think finding you was one of those moments." Rosalie stepped closer to him, lifting her face to his. "I think so too." Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the passion they had both kept carefully controlled during their courtship. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing rapidly, eyes bright with emotion and desire. "December seems very far away," Isaac murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "It does indeed," Rosalie agreed. "But it will come, and then we'll have a lifetime together." They ate their lunch in the cave, talking of their plans for the future. Isaac had begun building an addition to the ranch house: a larger bedroom, a proper kitchen, and a small study where Rosalie could prepare her lessons, as she intended to continue teaching, at least informally, once they were married. "The Wilsons' children and the Bradleys too, that's 5 school-age youngsters within riding distance of the ranch," she explained. "They're too far from town to attend the Cheyenne school regularly. I thought I might offer classes 3 days a week." "Always the teacher," Isaac said with affection. "You'll be good for this community, Rosalie. Bring some civilization to us rough ranchers." She laughed at that. "I'm not sure how civilizing an influence I'll be. I find myself enjoying the freedoms of Western life more and more. Aunt Martha was scandalized when I told her I intend to wear split skirts for riding once we're married." "Scandalous indeed," Isaac agreed with mock seriousness. "Next you'll be wanting to help with the roundup." "Would that be so terrible?" Rosalie asked, only half joking. Isaac studied her thoughtfully. "No, not terrible. Unusual, certainly. But then, we're hardly a conventional couple, are we? Boston school teacher and Wyoming rancher brought together by a blizzard. When you put it that way, it does sound rather improbable, Rosalie admitted. Like something from a dime novel. Yet here we are, Isaac said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. And I wouldn't change a thing about how we came to be together. The weeks continued to pass, each bringing them closer to their December wedding. Rosalie divided her time between her teaching duties and preparations for married life, while Isaac focused on completing the ranch house improvements before winter set in fully. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed Cheyenne into a winter wonderland. The ceremony was held in the small church where they had attended services together during their courtship, with Henry giving the bride away and Martha weeping happily in the front pew. Rosalie wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to her mother. Isaac, looking uncommonly formal in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such undisguised love that several of the lady guests were seen to dab at their eyes. The reception afterwards was held at the Carrington home, with what seemed like half of Cheyenne in attendance. Rosalie's students presented her with a handmade quilt, each square bearing the name of a child she had taught. Isaac's ranch hands gave them a fine set of matched riding horses, an extravagant gift that represented months of saved wages. As the celebration continued around them, Isaac drew Rosalie into a quiet corner for a moment alone. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, still seeming slightly amazed that she had actually become his wife. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. "When I rode into that blizzard last April, the last thing I expected to find was the woman who would change my life. And I certainly never imagined that nearly freezing to death would lead to the greatest happiness I've ever known," Rosalie replied. "Perhaps your mother was right about God's plan after all." They shared a brief, tender kiss before returning to their guests, both aware that their journey together was just beginning a journey that had started in the desperate cold of a spring blizzard and would continue through all the seasons of their lives, bound by the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. Years later, when their own children asked how they had met, Isaac and Rosalie would tell the story of the blizzard, the cave, and the cowboy who had found a half-frozen woman and shared his warmth. It became a family legend, repeated at gatherings and celebrations, a testament to the unexpected ways in which lives can intersect and destinies can change in a single moment of crisis and compassion. And each April, on the anniversary of that fateful storm, they would ride together to the cave, a pilgrimage of remembrance and gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together, and the love that had sustained them through every challenge and joy that followed.